given all that we just said there, it's like I still don't get, and help me out. I don't get why examining that stuff, about what I was about to say. Examining.
I'm sorry, I didn't want you to go on and miss that point. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
that's okay.
Go ahead.
It's okay. Examining all the stuff about whether or not the police were directly responsible for killing him. I mean, sure, you can do that, but why? Like, why was that as important to you when there's so many other things to focus on about, like I think about like reaching to people on the left and saying, look, like, think about this. Well, there's some people who are not going to be open to this. That's fine. There's always going to be some people that won't listen and like self-examine a bit. But every time, because people on the left are always going to be in favor of, we should regulate the sale of cigarettes. We should license vendors to sell the stuff in order to protect consumers or some nonsense. And so, but what they're doing, and I don't think that they're thinking about this, I really don't, at least I know I didn't when I used to be one, is that like, yeah, but what that means though, is that if somebody resists that, this is what happens to them. This is what you want to do to them if you want that law. And like that to me is far more powerful and less likely to get people pissed off or feeling squirmy in their chair kind of thing like I did. You know what I mean? The purpose of the examination of all that stuff is, whether the police were responsible or not. It's cloudy to me. Like I don't get it.
So you don't understand the motivation as to why I would want to talk about whether the police caused his death. That's. I just want to make sure I understand your perspective. That's the part that's not clear to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, would you question the motives of a black man who resisted the narrative that blacks have extreme criminal tendencies as a whole?
Question the motives.
In other words, let's say that I put out an argument. This is not my argument, but let's say I put out an argument that said, blacks, boy, mostly violent and criminal, right? And a black person resisted that racist characterization. Would you say to the black person, I'm not sure why you would focus on that?
Well, no, but I think I would, even if I didn't initially, depending upon where they took that.
No, come on, you wouldn't. If a black person was opposing racism, and rightly so, you wouldn't say, I don't understand why you're doing that, right?
No, not at the beginning, but depending upon what they said, I would.
I get that. I get that.
I mean? Okay, so go ahead.
But you're saying, like, why would I want to focus on whether the cops were responsible for his death and all that? Well, because there are facts involved, and I try to focus on the facts and go where the facts lead me. And, of course, I did include in the presentation all of the negative incidents that had occurred or been committed by the policeman in question beforehand. So I wasn't trying to, quote, whitewash anything. But have you ever heard the argument that America is in general has a big problem with racism?
I think I may have heard that once or twice.
You may have come across that once or twice. Have you ever come across the argument that a big component of America's racism is black racism?
Only from, the kind of rare sort of like people on the extreme right, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, okay. So it's discounted as an extremist position, right?
Oh, yeah, typically, sure.
Okay. Have you ever heard that in America the big problem is Asian racism?
You mean like Asian people being racist against others?
Indians and, Japanese and I don't know what the definition of the Asian race is in general, but just Asiatic. Let's just say is Chinese racism, that's the big problem in America.
You mean like them being the recipient of racism or them?
No, being racists.
No.
So we could go through this process for a while, but when people say America is racist, what are they really saying?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know.
No, it's a very simple question, and you know the answer as well as I do. You just don't want to say it.
I'm not sure. Well,
because we've just eliminated a whole bunch of races.
Oh, I see.
What's left?
I see what you mean. Well, yeah, the white people are racist.
White people are racist. White people are racist. When people talk about racism, they're talking about white people and only white people. In fact, white people are so racist that other races risk death to get into white countries. That's how racist and horrible white people are, or white-founded countries are. You know, the West. White people are so racist that people will try and cross oceans on tiny rafts just to get to white-founded countries. Mexicans will risk death at the hands of these coyotes, people who lead them across, I don't know if the other kind are there too, to try and get into white-founded countries. That is how unbelievably racist white people are. Everyone is desperate to get into white-founded countries. Because white people are so terrible, apparently we're just not worth watching at a distance. You've got to be up close to see how terrible white people are. So I despise the initiation of force in all of its forms, whether it's spanking or the state power or religious terrorism of children and so on. I despise, because I'm principled, and please understand, I'm not saying you're not, I'm just talking from my own perspective. As a philosopher, I must work in the greatest and widest possible abstractions, right? And I despise bigotry in all of its forms. I am not allowed to exclude certain groups from bigotry, because that would be bigoted, right? You know, there's that old Stephen Colbert joke, I don't see race. People tell me I'm white, and I believe them. I mean, but the first part of that statement is, I look at the world. I don't want to see race. I don't care. I don't care. Don't want to. And when I see one group consistently maligned as the source of all the world's problems, that's fucking bigoted as shit. That is bigoted as shit. People say America a racist. That's just a code word for whites a racist. When I see a racist narrative, and the Mike Brown and the Eric Garner narratives were racist because people weren't talking about the facts. They were bringing in the race. And they specifically excluded inconvenient facts in order to push a racist narrative. Race baiters are racist. Look, if I'm a giant white guy and I try and grab a white cop's gun, punch him in the head, wrestle for the gun goes off, and then I charge him, all 300 pounds of me, I'm going to get shot. And I am tired of everyone talking about racism. And I will also make the case that whites in general, in some ways, in many ways, are the least racist group. I don't see a lot of affirmative action in Middle Eastern countries trying to make sure that enough Christians get into positions of power. I don't see a lot of blacks in the NBA saying we don't have enough white people in here. I think that the race guilt of white people is a tragedy. Of course there are racist white people, there are racist black people, there are racist Chinese people. But I also genuinely believe that there are very few people in the world who wake up every morning and say, which order of skin color can I most oppress today? I think most people wake up and they deal with their problems and they go to work and they have fun with their kids and they don't want and are not driven by some fundamental need to oppress other people. And so I I'm bound to, on principle, resist racism in all its forms. And this narrative, let me give you a tiny example, then I'll shut up, because I'm certainly sending out a lot of info. Let me give you a tiny example of just how unbalanced that is, right? So, I'm sure you remember 9/11, right? And after 9/11, what were we constantly told to remember? Well, we were constantly told to remember that the Muslim Saudi hijackers are not representative of Islam, right?
That's what some people were saying. I felt like the thing that I was told or I caught was don't forget about the heroic people who went into these buildings and saved them, and the people that are on the front lines and the first responders. I felt like that was the
no, I get that
message.
I get that.
I think there was a lot of back and forth about Islam and that kind of thing.
But we certainly weren't. No reasonable person was expected to believe that Islamics were terrorists, right?
You mean like as an entire group?
As a group, right?
That's certainly what I think most people were making that case. I think there seemed like there were a lot of people saying, no, like there's the people like on Fox News kind of stuff, like Sean Hannity, like, but they all want the one world caliphate and this kind of stuff. And they want to bring Sharia law, like that it's all like built into the Quran. It's built into the religion itself.
So there were criticisms of the religious texts, but there was no one reasonable person who said all Muslims are terrorists, right?
I don't think so. No, not. I mean, universally.
There was, I think, in the beginning of season 3 of The West Wing, because it's important to go to the source for your general soupy lefty stuff.
Okay.
But Aaron, he has trouble getting around LA because he can never make a right turn. But that's perhaps a story for another time. But
okay.
9/11 happened, I think, if I remember rightly, between the second and third seasons, and they opened up the third season with Josh Lyman, played by a very charismatic actor, Bradley Whitford, I think his name is. Great actor, very charismatic. And he said, like Muslim terrorists are to Islam as the KKK is to Christianity. Right? So here we have an incident where a bunch of Islamic crazies fly planes into, causing over 3,000 deaths and so on. And we are constantly exhorted not to judge the actions of hundreds of millions of people by the actions of few crazy extremists, right?
Sure.
Now, that's not what happens with white people and racism. Right? Let's say that there were some genuine, bona fide racists out there. And I really can't think of any, but let's just say there were. And let's say,
sorry to interrupt. Maybe when you say racist, I mean, because I guess that's a loaded word sometimes. Like, do you mean somebody who's like sort of white supremacist racist, or like just let's
say so horribly racist that let's say they hijack a plane and fly it into a black college, killing 3,000 people, 3,000 blacks, all the while shouting "white power forever" over the radio.
All right.
Right? Let's say that happened. Never has, but let's say it did. Now, how many Al Sharptons and how many Jesse Jacksons do you think would be out there saying, these crazy guys absolutely do not represent white people? These guys are to white people as the KKK is to Christianity.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't think that. I don't know about pundits. You know what I mean? Because God knows what they would say about that. Something like that. I don't think that most people would say, "Oh, yeah, this is representative of white America," that they want to indiscriminately murder innocent black people in their university or something like that.
Have you not been reading any of the media reports on?
Of course, I have. I think I agree with part of what you're saying, that the narrative out there or whatever is pretty like one-sided in terms of like who's racist.
No.
You know what I mean?
No, it's not one-sided. It is racist. It is whites are racist. It's like the patriarchy. Automatically, by being a male, well, in fact, just a white male, you are sexist. And automatically, by being a white person, you are considered a racist. And that is incredibly bigoted. It's absolutely wrong. And there's no other group that I know of. Look, there are radical feminists out there, right? And there's not a sane person alive who thinks that these feminists who cheer on the death of men are representative of women as a whole, right? And I can't find for the life of me a white racist anywhere who's got any public power, any public capacity to do harm that compares to the outspoken proclamations of people like Marxists, of people like radical feminists, of people like black power advocates and so on. Those people say some crazy stuff and some pretty nasty stuff, some downright murderous stuff. And I would never say that these people are representative of their gender or racial group or ever as a whole. So even though this, quote, supposed demon of white racism, which people really can't find very well or very easily, even though it's far less public, far less egregious, far less outspoken, and far less dangerous and damaging than other radical groups, even just in America, most people who are fair-minded take great pains to separate the radicals from the group and not tar and feather the whole group with the reactions of the extremists. However, even though the supposed horde of white supremacists that are everywhere causing all of these problems for every other group, even though I can't find them anywhere that I look, whites are somehow to be tarred not just with the extremists, but with the extremists that nobody can ever seem to produce.